The metallic tang of blood mixed with sacred oils still coats my tongue from when I first cut into living flesh in the Emperor's name. My name is Magos Biologis Thaelon Vex, former Chirurgeon Prime of the Deathwatch, and I have seen what happens when the human body becomes a canvas for both salvation and damnation. You think that makes me another cold-hearted servant of the machine god. But you don't know what I've witnessed in the operating theatres beneath Terra's surface. I've held beating hearts that belonged to men whose souls had already fled. I've sutured wounds that would heal only to tear open again at the mention of forbidden names. For 37 years, I served the Imperium's finest warriors, believing I was saving lives. The truth is far more terrible. I was merely delaying an inevitable descent into something worse than death itself. Chapter 1. The Calling. The crimson robes of the Adeptus Mechanicus had never felt heavier than they did on the day I received my first assignment to the Deathwatch. Standing in the vast cathedral surgical hall of Mars, I watched the morning light filter through stained glass windows depicting the Emperor's victories, casting everything in shades of amber and blood. The scent of sacred incense, mixed with the sterile bite of antiseptic chemicals, created an atmosphere that was both holy and clinical, the perfect environment for what we called the Great Work. I was 23 standard years old then, fresh from completing my final augmentations and still adjusting to the weight of my new mechadendrite surgical arms. The flesh weakness in my hands had been replaced with precision servo motors capable of microscopic manipulation, while my eyes now housed autofocus lenses that could magnify cellular structures. Every breath I took was filtered through respiratory augmetics that could detect biological contamination at the molecular level. I was more machine than man, and I was proud of it. Magos Biologis Vex, came the crackling voice of my mentor, Dominus Zerath, his words filtered through vox grills that had replaced his larynx decades ago. Your expertise in xenobiological trauma treatment has earned you an honor beyond your years. The Deathwatch requires a chirurgeon capable of treating injuries inflicted by creatures that should not exist in the Emperor's galaxy. The Deathwatch. Even the name carried weight that settled in my augmented spine like lead. They were the chamber militant of the Ordo Xenos, the elite among the elite, space marines drawn from every chapter to serve the Inquisition in hunting the most dangerous alien threats humanity faced. To be selected as their chirurgeon was to be granted access to secrets that could drive lesser minds to madness. I had studied for this moment for 15 years, ever since I first witnessed a demonstration of Xenos physiology in the lower laboratories. I am honored, Dominus, I replied, my own voice already beginning to show the mechanical inflection that marked senior Mechanicus personnel. When do I depart for Watch Station Eriok? Zerath's optical sensors whirred as they focused on me with mechanical precision. You misunderstand, young Magos. You will not be serving at a watch station. Your assignment is to the mobile surgical facility aboard the battle barge Emperor's Judgment. You will be operating in active war zones, treating warriors whose injuries come from direct contact with entities that violate the natural order of creation. The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. Mobile surgical facility meant working while under fire, performing complex operations while the ship's hull shuddered from weapons impacts. It meant no sterile environment, no controlled conditions, no luxury of time to consider my actions. Just me, my instruments, and whatever nightmare injuries the Space Marines brought back from their encounters with Xenos horrors. Over the following weeks, I prepared for deployment with the methodical precision that the machine god demanded. I studied case files of previous Deathwatch medical operations, each one more harrowing than the last. Warriors who had been infected with Genestealer Kiss and required immediate amputation before the organism could take hold. Battle brothers who had been exposed to chaos plagues that turned their enhanced physiology against itself. Marines whose genetic stability had been compromised by contact with entities from beyond the veil of reality. The medical equipment I would be using was equally specialized. Plasma cutters for emergency amputations that could cauterize wounds instantly. Stasis fields to slow biological processes during complex procedures. Gene scanners to detect corruption at the cellular level. Every tool was a masterwork of Mechanicus engineering, designed to preserve the Emperor's warriors against threats that conventional medicine could not hope to address. My final day on Mars was spent in the depths of the Forge Cathedral, receiving the sacred oils and benedictions that would protect me during my service. The ritual took place in a chamber carved from the living rock of the planet, its walls lined with the skulls of tech priests who had given their lives in service to the machine god. As the Dominus anointed my augmentics with blessed lubricants and spoke the canticles of protection, I felt the weight of responsibility settling into my consciousness, like a program uploading into a cogitator. "Remember," Zirath intoned as the ceremony concluded, "your primary function is to preserve the fighting effectiveness of the Emperor's chosen warriors. Do not allow sentiment or squeamishness to interfere with necessary procedures. The enemies of mankind show no mercy, and neither must you when it comes to saving lives." His words echoed in my mind as I boarded the transport that would carry me to my new assignment. Through the viewport, I watched Mars shrinking behind us, its red surface scarred by the immense forge complexes that had shaped my understanding of the universe. I was leaving behind everything familiar, everything safe, to venture into a galaxy where the impossible was commonplace and where my skills would be tested against horrors I could barely imagine. The journey to rendezvous with the Emperor's judgment took 3 weeks through the warp, during which I spent my time reviewing medical texts and running diagnostic checks on my equipment. The ship's medici staff were respectful but distant, clearly aware that my augmentations and knowledge placed me far above their level of expertise. They showed me to my quarters, a sparse chamber equipped with basic life support systems and a direct connection to the ship's data networks, and left me to prepare for what lay ahead. As we approached our destination, I received my first communication from Captain Theron of the Deathwatch. His voice carried the weight of centuries of warfare, each word carefully measured and precise. "Magos Biologis Vex, welcome to the Emperor's judgment. Your arrival comes at a critical time. We have 3 battle brothers currently in surgical stasis awaiting procedures that exceed the capabilities of our standard medici staff. Your first operations will begin immediately upon transfer." Looking back now, I realize that moment marked the end of my innocence. I had believed that my training and augmentations had prepared me for anything the galaxy could present. I had studied anatomical texts that detailed every variation of Xenos physiology, memorized surgical procedures for treating injuries that ranged from conventional weapons to exotic energy discharges. I thought I understood what it meant to serve the Imperium's most elite warriors in their struggle against the darkness. I was wrong. The red emergency lights were already flashing when my transport docked with the Emperor's judgment. Chapter 2. First Contact. The moment I stepped aboard the Emperor's judgment, I knew this assignment would be unlike anything I had experienced on Mars. The battle barge thrummed with barely contained power, its corridors echoing with the sound of heavy footsteps as Space Marines moved between mission briefings and equipment preparations. The air itself seemed charged with tension, carrying the metallic scent of weapons oil and the ozone tang of power armor systems running at combat readiness. Brother Sergeant Karnas of the Imperial Fists met me at the docking bay, his yellow power armor scarred by countless battles and his face bearing the ritual scarification that marked a veteran of the Deathwatch. His bionic left eye whirred as it focused on me, scanning my augmentics with professional interest. "Magos Biologis Vex. I am to escort you to the surgical bay." Captain Theron extends his regrets that he cannot greet you personally, but the situation requires his immediate attention. As we walked through the ship's corridors, I marveled at the scale of everything around me. The passages were built to accommodate fully armored Space Marines, making me feel diminutive despite my own considerable height. Gothic arches soared overhead, their stonework carved with prayers and litanies that serve both decorative and functional purposes. I recognized several as ward phrases against corruption, their very presence helping to maintain the spiritual purity of the vessel. "Your first patients," Karnas explained as we walked, "are the survivors of an investigation into reports of unusual activity on the agri-world of Thessia Prime. What they encountered there," he paused, and I noticed his scarred hands clench involuntarily. "The enemy employed biological weapons unlike anything in our tactical databases. 3 of our battle brothers were exposed before the threat could be contained. We reached the medical bay, and I immediately began cataloguing the equipment available to me. The surgical theatre was impressive by any standard, equipped with stasis pods capable of maintaining patients in temporal suspension, autosurgeons for routine procedures, and gene scanners sensitive enough to detect corruption at the molecular level. Everything was built to imperial military specifications, designed to function under the most adverse conditions while maintaining the precision necessary for treating the Emperor's chosen warriors. My first patient was Brother Valerian of the Raven Guard, currently suspended in a stasis field that kept his vital signs stable while I assessed his condition. According to the medical logs, he had been exposed to some kind of spore-based organism that was attempting to rewrite his genetic structure. The visible symptoms were subtle, but deeply disturbing. His black hair had begun showing streaks of sickly green, and portions of his skin displayed a texture that was more plant-like than human. The contamination is spreading despite his enhanced immune system, reported Apothecary Matthias, the ship's chief medical officer. His red power armor bore the caduceus symbol of his calling, and his voice carried the clinical detachment I had learned to associate with battlefield medicine. Standard purification protocols have proven ineffective. The organism appears to be specifically adapted to overcome Astartes' physiology. I activated my examination protocols, allowing my enhanced vision to analyze Valerian's condition in detail. What I saw made my augmented heart skip several beats. The contamination wasn't simply a biological infection. It was a coordinated assault on his genetic structure that showed clear signs of deliberate engineering. Someone or something had created this organism specifically to corrupt space marines, understanding their enhanced physiology well enough to circumvent their natural defenses. "Have any of you encountered anything like this before?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Never," Matthias replied grimly, which is why Captain Theron specifically requested a Magos Biologis for this assignment. We need expertise that exceeds anything available through conventional medical training. My second patient, Brother Korvac of the White Scars, presented an even more challenging case. He had been exposed to what the tactical reports described as ambulatory plant matter that had attempted to integrate itself with his nervous system. The organism had been removed through emergency field surgery, but the damage it had caused was extensive. Neural pathways that should have been protected by his enhanced skull structure showed signs of foreign influence, and his motor responses were inconsistent with normal Astartes reflexes. The creature established direct interface with his central nervous system, I observed, studying the scan results on my data slate. It was attempting to establish control over motor functions while leaving cognitive abilities intact, a horrifying combination of efficiency and cruelty. The third patient was perhaps the most disturbing of all. Brother Arcturus of the Salamanders had been infected with something that defied easy classification. His enhanced metabolism was being slowly converted to process nutrients in ways that human physiology was never designed to accommodate. His skin had taken on a waxy texture, and his internal temperature had risen to levels that should have been lethal even for an Astartes. "The transformation appears to be progressive," I noted, reviewing the timeline of his symptoms. "Whatever infected him is systematically replacing his biological functions with something else. If we cannot halt the process soon, he will no longer be human in any meaningful sense of the word." Brother Sergeant Carnus observed my examinations with professional interest, but I could see the concern in his remaining biological eye. These were his battle brothers, warriors he had fought alongside for decades, and watching them succumb to alien contamination clearly affected him, despite his training in emotional suppression. "Can they be saved, Magos?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. I spent several more hours conducting detailed analyses before I could provide any kind of meaningful answer. The contamination in each case was different, suggesting either multiple distinct organisms or a single entity capable of adapting its attack vector based on the target. In either case, conventional medical procedures would be insufficient. I would need to employ techniques that bordered on the experimental, procedures that carried significant risks, but offered the only hope of preserving these warriors' humanity. "Salvation is possible," I finally replied, "but the procedures required will push the boundaries of what Astartes' physiology can endure. Brother Valerian will require complete genetic resynchronization, essentially rewriting his DNA sequence to purge the foreign elements. Brother Korvac needs neural pathway reconstruction using cybernetic interfaces to bypass the damaged tissue. As for Brother Arcturus," I paused, considering the implications of what I was about to propose. "His case will require the most extreme intervention. I will need to place him in complete biological stasis, while his entire metabolic system is purged and rebuilt from the cellular level up." The silence that followed my assessment stretched for several long moments before Karnas spoke again. "What are the risks?" "Significant," I admitted. "Any of these procedures could result in death or permanent disability. But without intervention, all three will be lost within the next 72 hours. The contamination is too advanced to halt through conventional means." Karnas nodded slowly, his scarred features set in grim determination. "Then we proceed. These battle brothers have faced worse odds in service to the Emperor. They would choose the risk of death over certain corruption." As I began preparing for the most challenging surgical procedures of my career, I couldn't shake the feeling that these cases represented something larger than isolated incidents of xenos contamination. The sophistication of the organisms, their specific adaptation to counter Astartes' physiology, and the coordinated nature of the attack all suggested an intelligence behind the threat that understood humanity's defenders far better than any enemy should. I activated the surgical theater's security protocols and began the lengthy process of sterilizing my instruments. Whatever had created these abominations, I would not allow it to claim these warriors without a fight. The Emperor's chosen deserved nothing less than my absolute commitment to their preservation, regardless of the personal cost. The first surgery would begin within the hour, and I was about to discover just how far the galaxy's horrors could push even the most advanced medical science. Chapter 3. The Deep Cut. Brother Valerian's surgery began at 0347 ship's time, under the harsh glare of surgical lumens that cast everything in stark relief. I had spent the previous 3 hours in meditation and final preparation, running diagnostic checks on every piece of equipment while reviewing anatomical diagrams of Astartes' physiology. The gene sequence purification I was about to attempt had never been performed on a living subject. All previous research had been conducted on post-mortem specimens or laboratory cultures. As I made the first incision, cutting through the enhanced muscle tissue with a precision plasma scalpel, I was struck by how wrong everything felt. Valerian's blood, normally the deep crimson that marked the Astartes as superior to baseline humanity, carried an unsettling green tinge that seemed to pulse with its own internal light. The contamination had progressed further than my initial scans had indicated, reaching into his cardiovascular system at the molecular level. "Contamination readings are increasing as we access deeper tissue layers," reported my surgical assistant, a servitor whose biological components had been replaced with specialized medical equipment. Its monotone voice carried none of the concern I was feeling, but the data it provided was invaluable. Foreign genetic material is present in concentrations of 37% in surface tissue, 62% in secondary muscle groups. I activated my mechadendrite surgical arms, their delicate manipulators extending from my back like the legs of some mechanical spider. Each one carried a different specialized tool: gene sequencers, cellular extractors, microscopic suture devices that could work at the subcellular level. The sight of them moving independently while my biological hands worked with larger instruments always unsettled baseline humans. But today, I was grateful for every advantage my augmentations provided. The real horror began when I reached Valerian's enhanced organs. His secondary heart, one of the 19 additional organs that transformed a human into an Astartes, was no longer beating in its normal rhythm. Instead, it pulsed with an irregular pattern that seemed almost musical, as if the organ itself was trying to communicate through rhythm. The surface of the heart muscle showed the same green discoloration I had observed in his blood, but here It formed patterns that looked disturbingly deliberate. "Magos," my assistant droned. "Genetic analysis of extracted tissue samples indicates the presence of xenos DNA sequences that do not match any known classification in imperial databases." I paused in my work, studying the readouts on my data screens with growing unease. The contamination wasn't random, it was systematic, purposeful, as if something was attempting to transform Valerian into a hybrid being that retained Astartes' capabilities while serving alien purposes. The foreign genetic material wasn't destroying his enhanced organs, it was modifying them, making subtle changes that would fundamentally alter their function while leaving them superficially intact. "Begin preparation of purified gene templates," I ordered, though my confidence in the procedure was beginning to waver. "We need to completely rewrite his genetic structure before the contamination reaches critical organs." The gene purification process required introducing modified retroviruses that would seek out and destroy the alien DNA while replacing it with pure human genetic material. It was a procedure that pushed the boundaries of what biological systems could endure, essentially forcing every cell in Valerian's body to rebuild itself according to new genetic instructions. In a baseline human, such a process would be invariably fatal. Even in an Astartes, the survival rate was purely theoretical. As I began the injection sequence, feeding the purification viruses directly into Valerian's enhanced circulatory system, his body began to convulse despite the stasis field holding him in temporal suspension. The contamination was fighting back, responding to the threat with an intelligence that no mere biological agent should possess. His skin began to shift color rapidly, cycling between normal flesh tones and the sickly green of corruption, as if two different genetic programs were battling for control of his cellular structure. "Vital signs are fluctuating beyond normal parameters," the servitor reported. "Subject is experiencing massive cellular reconstruction at the molecular level. Recommend immediate cessation of procedure." "Negative," I replied, though sweat was beginning to bead on my forehead, despite the surgical theatre's controlled temperature. "We've passed the point of no return. Either the purification succeeds, or we lose him entirely." The battle within Valerian's body played out across my monitoring screens in waves of data that painted a picture of biological warfare at the cellular level. The purification viruses were winning, slowly but steadily destroying the alien contamination and replacing it with pure Astartes genetic material. But the cost was becoming apparent. His enhanced organs were struggling to maintain function as their very structure was rewritten from the genetic level up. 3 hours into the procedure, something unexpected happened. As the last traces of alien DNA were purged from his system, Valerian's body began to convulse more violently than ever before. For a moment, I feared that the stress of genetic reconstruction had caused complete systemic failure. Then he opened his eyes that now glowed with an inner light that had nothing to do with the contamination I had just removed. "Brother," he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in my augmented auditory receptors. I saw them. In the space between heartbeats, I saw what they really are. The medical sensors showed his vital signs stabilizing rapidly, his enhanced physiology adapting to the genetic reconstruction with remarkable speed. But there was something different about him now, something that hadn't been there before the contamination. His neural activity patterns showed spikes of activity in brain regions that shouldn't be accessible to conscious thought, and his muscle tone displayed subtle changes that suggested capabilities beyond even normal Astartes parameters. "What did you see, Brother Valerian?" I asked, though part of me wasn't certain I wanted to know the answer. His eyes focused on me with an intensity that made my augmented nervous system register threat warnings. "The garden world. They're growing it deliberately, Magos. The whole planet is becoming something else, something that can think and plan and hunger, and we walked right into its trap." I completed the surgical closure with hands that moved automatically while my mind processed the implications of his words. The contamination hadn't been a weapon in any conventional sense. It had been a reconnaissance probe, a way for whatever intelligence controlled Thessia Prime to learn about Astartes' physiology. By studying how the contamination interacted with enhanced human biology, it had gained intimate knowledge of the Emperor's warriors that could be used to create more effective threats. Brother Valerian survived the procedure, though his recovery would take weeks, and the full extent of the changes to his physiology wouldn't be apparent for months. As I prepared for the next surgery, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just saved him from one horror, only to expose him to something potentially worse. The light in his eyes hadn't faded, and sometimes I caught him staring at bulkheads with an expression that suggested he was seeing through them to something beyond. Brother Korvac's neural reconstruction proved equally challenging, though in different ways. The alien organism had established itself so thoroughly within his nervous system that removing it required essentially rebuilding his brain's interface with his enhanced reflexes. The procedure took 6 hours of microsurgery, during which I had to maintain conscious communication with the patient to ensure that critical neural pathways remained intact. "Tell me about the battle on Thessia Prime," I said as I worked, using the conversation to monitor his cognitive functions while my mechadendrites performed delicate repairs to damaged nerve tissue. "It wasn't a battle," he replied, his words slightly slurred due to the neural dampening fields I was employing. "It was a harvest. They weren't trying to kill us. They were studying us, learning how we think and fight and react. Every wound they inflicted was designed to gather information rather than cause maximum damage." His words confirmed my growing suspicions about the true nature of the threat we were facing. This wasn't random Xenos aggression or territorial expansion. It was a carefully orchestrated intelligence-gathering operation designed to catalogue the capabilities and limitations of the Imperium's elite forces. Brother Arcturus's metabolic reconstruction proved to be the most harrowing procedure of all. His entire digestive and circulatory system had been compromised by the alien contamination, requiring me to essentially rebuild his internal organs while keeping him alive. The surgery lasted 14 hours, during which I had to maintain perfect concentration despite the growing exhaustion that threatened to compromise my augmented reflexes. By the time all 3 procedures were complete, I had gained insights into the enemy we faced that filled me with dread. This wasn't simply another Xenos threat to be catalogued and countered. It was something far more insidious. An intelligence that understood humanity well enough to create targeted biological weapons that could subvert our greatest defenders from within. As I cleaned my instruments and prepared my surgical reports, I realized that saving these 3 battle brothers was only the beginning. Whatever controlled Thessia Prime now had detailed biological data on Astartes' physiology, and it would undoubtedly use that knowledge to create even more effective threats. We had won this particular engagement, but the larger war was only just beginning. The Emperor protects, but sometimes his protection comes at a price that tests the limits of faith itself. Chapter 4: The Breaking Point. 6 weeks after the Thessia Prime surgeries, we received an urgent Vox transmission from Watch Station Eriok that would change everything I thought I understood about the enemy we faced. The message arrived during what should have been a routine patrol of the Jericho Reach, encoded with security protocols that indicated its contents were classified at the highest levels of the Inquisition. Captain Theron summoned all senior staff to the strategic briefing chamber, a Gothic hall dominated by a massive hololithic display table that could project tactical data with crystal clarity. "Brothers," Captain Theron began, his scarred features set in grim lines that spoke of terrible news to come. "The situation on Thessia Prime has escalated beyond our initial assessment. What we believed to be an isolated incident of Xenos contamination is now confirmed to be part of a coordinated campaign affecting 17 systems across the sector." The hololithic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of the affected region. Each contaminated world pulsed with sickly green light, connected by data streams that revealed the scope of the threat we were facing. Agri-worlds, hive cities, mining colonies, all had reported similar incidents of biological contamination that specifically targeted human populations while leaving infrastructure intact. Intelligence reports indicate that the contamination is not merely spreading randomly, continued Brother Captain Artemis of the Crimson Fists, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent fighting impossible odds. Analysis of the attack patterns suggests a coordinating intelligence that understands Imperial defensive protocols with disturbing accuracy. They are learning from each engagement, adapting their methods to counter our responses. I studied the tactical data with growing horror as the true scope of the threat became apparent. The contamination wasn't just affecting civilian populations, it was specifically targeting Imperial Guard regiments, planetary defense forces, and even Astartes forces that responded to the initial outbreaks. Each engagement provided the enemy with biological samples and tactical data that made subsequent attacks more effective. "Magos Biologis Vex," Captain Theron said, turning to address me directly. "Your surgical reports from the Thessia Prime incident have been forwarded to the highest levels of the Mechanicus hierarchy. The Fabricator General himself has authorized the release of restricted biological warfare protocols for your use. We need you to develop countermeasures that can protect our forces from this contamination." The weight of responsibility settled on my augmented shoulders like a physical burden. The biological warfare protocols Captain Theron referenced were among the most closely guarded secrets of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Techniques developed during the dark age of technology that had been banned for good reason. They involved procedures that pushed the boundaries of what could be considered human, modifications that could provide protection against exotic threats at the cost of fundamental changes to biology and consciousness. "Sir," I replied, my voice carefully controlled despite the turmoil in my thoughts. Implementation of those protocols would require extensive preparation and specialized equipment that we do not currently possess. More critically, the procedures themselves carry risks that could compromise the spiritual purity of any subjects who undergo them. "Magos!" Brother Sergeant Karnas interjected, his bionic eye focusing on me with mechanical precision. "3 of my battle brothers are already showing signs of residual contamination despite your successful surgeries. Whatever you removed from their systems has left changes that we are only beginning to understand. If these protocols can prevent similar contamination in the future, we must consider their implementation, regardless of the risks involved." His words struck me like a physical blow. Despite all my skill and the advanced medical technology at my disposal, I had failed to completely purge the alien influence from my patients. The subtle changes I had observed in their behavior and physiology were not side effects of the surgical procedures. They were signs that the contamination had left permanent alterations that might never be fully understood or reversed. "Show me the data," I said, dreading what I would discover, but knowing that I needed to understand the full extent of my failure. The medical reports that Brother Sergeant Karnas provided painted a picture of gradual but inexorable change. Brother Valerian's enhanced vision now allowed him to perceive electromagnetic spectra that no human technology could detect. Brother Korvac's reaction times had improved beyond even Astartes' norms, but his tactical thinking showed patterns that suggested influence from non-human intelligence. Brother Arcturus maintained normal physical function, but his dietary requirements had shifted to include trace elements that shouldn't be necessary for human metabolism. "They are still loyal to the Emperor," Karnas assured me, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Their faith remains strong, and their dedication to the chapter unchanged. But there are moments when they display knowledge or capabilities that cannot be explained by their training or experience." I spent the next 72 hours in deep analysis of the biological data, cross-referencing the observed changes with theoretical models of Xenos biological engineering. What I discovered filled me with a dread that my augmented emotions dampening system struggled to contain. The contamination hadn't been designed to kill or corrupt in any conventional sense. It was a recruitment tool, a way of gradually converting human subjects into hybrid entities that retained their original personalities and loyalties while serving the interests of the alien intelligence that created them. "The enemy is not trying to destroy us," I reported to the senior staff during our next briefing. "They are trying to recruit us. Each successful contamination creates another agent that can pass undetected among human populations while providing intelligence and assistance to the larger organism. It is perhaps the most insidious form of warfare ever conceived. The implications of my analysis hung over the briefing chamber like a toxic cloud. If I was correct, then every human who had been exposed to the contamination, regardless of whether they appeared to recover, was potentially compromised. The enemy had created the perfect infiltration system, one that used humanity's own protective instincts against them. Captain Theron's response was immediate and decisive. All personnel who have been exposed to contamination, including our 3 recovered battle brothers, will be placed under constant observation. Magos Vex, you will implement whatever protocols are necessary to develop protection against this threat. The spiritual purity of our forces is secondary to preventing the contamination from spreading further. The authorization to employ restricted biological warfare protocols opened doors to knowledge that I had never expected to access in my lifetime. Hidden archives within the ship's databanks revealed research conducted during humanity's darkest hours, when the survival of the species required techniques that violated every principle of biological sanctity. The procedures detailed in those files could indeed provide protection against exotic contamination, but the cost would be the fundamental humanity of anyone who underwent them. I began my work in the deepest laboratory aboard the Emperor's Judgment, a facility that had been designed for research into the most dangerous Xenos threats humanity faced. The chamber was lined with containment fields and equipped with automated purge systems that could sterilize the entire area in case of contamination breach. It was here that I would attempt to create defenders who could face the alien threat without risk of corruption. The first volunteer was Brother Sergeant Marcus of the Ultramarines, a veteran warrior whose exposure to the Thessia Prime contamination had been minimal but sufficient to warrant concern. The procedure I performed on him involved introducing modified genetic sequences that would make his cellular structure incompatible with alien influence, while enhancing his natural immune responses beyond even Astartes' norms. "This will fundamentally alter your biology, brother," I warned him as he lay on the surgical table. "You will remain human in mind and spirit, but your physical form will become something new. Something that exists at the boundary between human and machine. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" His response embodied everything I had come to admire about the Astartes. "Magos, I have served the Emperor for 2 centuries. If this procedure allows me to continue that service while protecting others from corruption, then I embrace whatever changes it brings. Do what must be done." The transformation took 36 hours of continuous surgery, during which I fundamentally rewrote his genetic code to incorporate elements of synthetic biology that would resist any form of external influence. When he finally awakened, Brother Marcus was no longer entirely human in any biological sense, though his mind and soul remained unchanged. His skin had taken on a metallic sheen that reflected light in patterns that suggested internal circuitry, and his blood carried nanoscopic machines that would destroy any foreign biological agent before it could establish a foothold in his system. "How do you feel, brother?" I asked, as he sat up on the surgical table with movements that were slightly too fluid for baseline human motion. "Different," he replied, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated with the ship's internal systems. "But still myself, still loyal to the Emperor and to my brothers. The changes are acceptable." The success of Brother Marcus's transformation opened the path to protecting our forces from the alien threat, but it also marked the beginning of a new form of warfare that would transform the very nature of humanity's defenders. Each subsequent procedure refined the process, creating warriors who were immune to biological corruption, but increasingly distant from their original human nature. As I worked to perfect the protective protocols, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were winning individual battles while losing a larger war for the soul of humanity itself. The enemy had forced us to become something other than human in order to resist their influence, achieving a victory of a different but equally profound kind. The Emperor protects, but sometimes his protection requires sacrifices that test the limits of what it means to be human in his service. Chapter 5. The Turning Point. The moment that changed everything came not in the sterile environment of my surgical theatre, but in the ship's chapel during evening prayers. I had been observing Brother Marcus for 2 weeks following his transformation, monitoring his adaptation to the genetic modifications that had made him immune to alien contamination. His performance in combat simulations had exceeded all expectations, his enhanced physiology allowing him to engage Xenos threats with unprecedented effectiveness. By every measurable standard, the procedure had been a complete success. That's why his breakdown during the Litany of Faith caught everyone by surprise. I was standing in the shadows at the back of the chapel, using my enhanced vision to monitor the vital signs of the assembled Space Marines, while they recited the sacred words that bound them to the Emperor's service. Brother Marcus had been participating normally, his voice joining the rhythmic chant that filled the Gothic chamber with its echoes. Then, without warning, he stopped speaking and began to tremble with increasing violence. "The words," he whispered, his voice carrying clearly through the vaulted space despite its quiet tone. "The words don't mean anything anymore. They're just sounds, just noise." The entire congregation fell silent as Brother Marcus rose from his position among the kneeling warriors. His augmented physiology made his movements unnaturally fluid, and the metallic sheen of his modified skin caught the candlelight in patterns that seemed to shift independently of his motion. When he turned to face the altar, I saw something in his expression that made my enhanced cardiac system skip several beats. He was looking at the Emperor's image, not with the reverence and devotion that defined an Astartes, but with the clinical detachment of a researcher studying an interesting specimen. "I remember the faith," he continued, his words falling into the chapel's silence like stones into still water. "I remember believing that the Emperor watched over us, that our service had meaning beyond mere survival. But now..." He paused, tilting his head with a gesture that was disturbing in its inhuman precision. "Now I understand that it was simply a useful fiction, a control mechanism designed to ensure loyalty through emotional manipulation." Brother Sergeant Carnus rose slowly from his position near the altar, his hand moving instinctively toward the bolt pistol at his side. "Brother Marcus, you speak words of heresy. The transformation has affected your spiritual clarity. You need medical attention." "Medical attention," Marcus repeated, and his laugh carried harmonics that made the chapel's stained glass windows vibrate in their frames. "Yes, perhaps the Magos can explain what he has done to me. Perhaps he can tell you why I can no longer feel the Emperor's presence, why the sacred words that once filled me with purpose now sound like meaningless gibberish, designed to comfort the weak-minded." All eyes turned to me as I stepped out of the shadows, my augmented mind racing through possible explanations for what I was witnessing. The genetic modifications I had performed were designed to affect only his physical resistance to contamination. They shouldn't have touched his consciousness or his spiritual connection to the Emperor. Yet the evidence before me suggested that my interventions had severed something fundamental in his psyche, something that defined him as more than just an enhanced warrior. "Brother Marcus," I said carefully, approaching him with the caution I would use around an unstable explosive device. "The procedures you underwent were specifically designed to leave your cognitive functions unchanged. What you are experiencing may be a temporary side effect of your body adapting to the genetic modifications." His augmented eyes focused on me with an intensity that triggered every threat assessment protocol in my consciousness. "Temporary. Magos, I have clarity now that I never possessed before. I can see the Emperor's Imperium for what it truly is, a vast machine designed to perpetuate itself through the systematic exploitation of human suffering. And we, his chosen warriors, are simply the most efficient components in that machine." The theological implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. The genetic modifications I had introduced weren't just affecting his biology, they were somehow interfering with his capacity for faith itself. By making him immune to alien influence, I had inadvertently severed his connection to the spiritual foundations that gave meaning to his existence as an Astartes. "That is enough." Captain Theron's voice cut through the tension like a power sword through armor as he strode into the chapel. His command presence filled the space immediately, his scarred features set in an expression of absolute authority. "Brother Marcus, you will report to the medical bay for immediate evaluation. This discussion ends now." but Marcus didn't move to obey. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his augmented physiology showing none of the involuntary responses that marked normal human emotional states. "Captain, I mean no disrespect, but I can no longer accept orders based on faith in systems I now recognize as fundamentally flawed. If you wish me to comply, you will need to provide logical justification for your commands." The silence that followed stretched for an eternity before Captain Theron drew his bolt pistol in one fluid motion, its muzzle trained on Marcus's chest with unwavering precision. "The justification, brother, is that I am your superior officer, and you are bound by oaths of loyalty that transcend your personal doubts. You will comply, or you will be considered in rebellion against the Emperor's will." For a moment that lasted forever, the two warriors faced each other across the chapel's altar. Marcus's enhanced vision gave him advantages that might allow him to react faster than a normal Astartes, but Theron's experience and training represented centuries of warfare against the galaxy's most dangerous enemies. The outcome of any confrontation between them was far from certain. Then Marcus smiled, an expression that was somehow more disturbing than any display of anger would have been. "I understand, Captain. You are correct. My oaths of loyalty remain binding regardless of my personal beliefs about their ultimate validity. I will comply with your orders and report for medical evaluation." As he walked past me toward the chapel's exit, Marcus paused just long enough to speak quietly in my ear. "You have freed me from one form of corruption, Magos, only to reveal another that runs far deeper. I wonder which version of myself was more truly human, the faithful warrior or the clear-sighted machine I have become." His words haunted me as I followed him to the medical bay, where I spent the next 12 hours conducting the most comprehensive analysis of my career. Every test I performed confirmed the same horrifying conclusion. The genetic modifications that had made him immune to alien contamination had also severed his capacity for the faith that defined him as a servant of the Emperor. I had saved his body while potentially damning his soul. The theological implications of my discovery rippled through the ship's command structure like a virus. If the protection I offered against alien contamination came at the cost of spiritual corruption, then I was faced with an impossible choice. Allow humanity's defenders to remain vulnerable to alien influence, or transform them into beings who could no longer understand why they were fighting. Brother Sergeant Karnas found me in my laboratory 3 days later, staring at genetic analysis data that I had reviewed hundreds of times without finding a solution. His scarred features showed the strain of the difficult decisions we all faced, and his remaining biological eye held a mixture of determination and resignation that I had learned to associate with Space Marines accepting impossible odds. "Magos," he said quietly, "I need to know if there is any way to reverse what you did to Brother Marcus. Any procedure that might restore his capacity for faith while maintaining his resistance to contamination." I wished I could offer him hope, but my duty demanded honesty regardless of how painful the truth might be. "The modifications are integrated at the genetic level, Brother Sergeant. Reversing them would require completely rebuilding his biology from the ground up, a process that would almost certainly prove fatal. More critically, I cannot guarantee that restoration would be possible even with unlimited resources and time." Karnas absorbed this information with the stoic acceptance that marked his kind, but I could see the weight of command settling more heavily on his shoulders. Then we face a choice between physical corruption and spiritual damnation. There is no path forward that preserves both the body and the soul. "Perhaps," I replied, though even as I spoke the words I wasn't certain I believed them. "But I will continue searching for alternatives. The Emperor's servants deserve better than the choice between two forms of corruption." As I returned to my research, I couldn't escape the feeling that Brother Marcus's transformation was only the beginning. The enemy we faced had forced us into a position where victory might be indistinguishable from defeat, where protecting humanity required sacrificing the very qualities that made us human. In trying to preserve the Emperor's warriors, I might have already lost the war for their souls. The Emperor protects, but sometimes his protection demands prices that test the very foundations of faith itself. Chapter 6: Consequences and Adaptations. The weeks following Brother Marcus's spiritual breakdown became a period of careful observation and difficult decisions. I implemented monitoring protocols that tracked not just the physical condition of our transformed warriors, but also their psychological and spiritual states. What I discovered painted a complex picture of beings who remained technically human while becoming something fundamentally different from what they had been. Brother Marcus adapted to his condition with the methodical precision that marked all Astartes, but his adaptation took forms that disturbed even the most experienced veterans aboard the Emperor's judgment. He continued to perform his duties with flawless efficiency, following orders and maintaining equipment with the same attention to detail he had always shown. Yet there was a quality to his service that felt hollow, as if he was going through the motions of faith and loyalty, without any genuine connection to their meaning. "He fights like a perfect weapon," Brother Sergeant Karnas observed during one of our regular briefings. "His tactical assessments are brilliant, his combat performance exceeds all previous baselines, and he never hesitates to place himself in danger for his battle brothers. But watching him in action is like watching a sophisticated automaton mimicking human behavior." The three battle brothers, who had been treated for contamination from Thessia Prime, presented their own challenges. While they retained their faith and emotional connections to their service, the subtle changes in their capabilities made them increasingly isolated from their unmodified comrades. Brother Valerian's enhanced perception allowed him to detect threats that others couldn't even comprehend, but his warnings often sounded like mystical nonsense to warriors trained in practical tactics. Brother Korvac's improved reaction times made him invaluable in combat, but his tactical thinking had begun incorporating strategies that seemed almost Xenos in their unconventional approach. Brother Arcturus perhaps suffered the most from his modifications. His dietary requirements had shifted so dramatically that he could no longer partake in the ritual meals that bonded the ship's complement together. The trace elements his metabolism now required could only be obtained from specially prepared synthetic compounds that bore little resemblance to normal food. Each meal became a reminder of how far he had moved from baseline humanity. "I dream of gardens," he confided to me during one of his medical evaluations. "Vast growing spaces where the boundary between plant and animal becomes meaningless. I know these visions come from whatever touched me on Thessia Prime, but they don't feel alien anymore. They feel like memories of a home I've never seen." The spiritual counselor attached to our mission, Chaplain Ezekiel of the Dark Angels, struggled to provide guidance for warriors whose relationship with faith had been fundamentally altered by their experiences. His attempts to lead them in prayer and meditation revealed the depth of the changes they had undergone. Where once they had found comfort and strength in the familiar rituals, now they seemed to be observing religious observances from a perspective of detached analysis. "The Emperor's light still shines within them," Chaplain Ezekiel reported to Captain Theron during one of our strategic meetings. "But it has been refracted through experiences that have no precedent in our theological frameworks. I find myself counseling warriors who serve the Emperor with perfect loyalty while questioning the fundamental assumptions that define our understanding of that service." Captain Theron's response reflected the pragmatic approach that had kept him alive through centuries of warfare against impossible odds. "Chaplain, we face an enemy that attacks the very foundations of what it means to be human. If our warriors must adapt to survive that threat, then we will find new theological frameworks to accommodate their adaptations. The Emperor's will is manifest in survival and victory, not in rigid adherence to doctrine that may no longer apply to our circumstances." This flexibility became essential as reports arrived from other Imperial forces encountering similar contamination threats. The biological weapons being deployed against humanity were becoming more sophisticated with each engagement, suggesting that our enemy was learning from every encounter and adapting their strategies accordingly. The countermeasures I had developed were already becoming obsolete as new variants of contamination emerged that could penetrate even enhanced immune systems. My research into alternative protection methods led me deeper into archived knowledge that had been forbidden for good reason. The genetic modifications I was developing pushed the boundaries of what could be considered human while maintaining enough biological compatibility to preserve consciousness and personality. Each new variant offered better protection against contamination while requiring greater sacrifices of the subject's original nature. The breakthrough came when I discovered a way to create modular genetic modifications that could be activated selectively based on the specific threat encountered. Instead of permanent transformation, warriors could undergo temporary enhancement that would provide protection during specific missions, while allowing them to return to baseline humanity afterward. The process was complex and risky, but it offered hope for preserving both body and soul. The modifications are designed to remain dormant until activated by specific biological triggers, I explained to the assembled senior staff. When a warrior encounters contamination, the enhanced immune responses activate automatically to provide protection. Once the threat passes, the modifications return to dormant state, allowing normal spiritual and emotional function to resume. Brother Sergeant Karnas reviewed my technical specifications with the careful attention of a warrior evaluating new equipment. What are the risks of this approach, Magos? What happens if the modifications fail to activate when needed, or if they remain active longer than intended? The risks are significant, I admitted. Failure to activate could result in contamination despite the modifications. Extended activation could lead to permanent changes, similar to what Brother Marcus experienced. But the alternative is to leave our forces vulnerable to threats that are becoming more sophisticated with each encounter. The decision to implement the new protection protocols was made by Captain Theron after extensive consultation with the chaplain and senior battle brothers. The first volunteers were warriors who had already shown signs of contamination exposure, veterans who understood the risks but were willing to accept them in order to continue serving effectively. Brother Valerian was among the first to undergo the new procedure, his previous contamination making him an ideal test subject for the modular enhancements. The surgery required 18 hours of precise genetic manipulation, during which I inserted dormant modification sequences throughout his enhanced physiology. When he awakened, he appeared unchanged from his previous modified state, but internal scans showed the presence of inactive genetic programs that would activate automatically if he encountered specific contamination signatures. I feel potential, he said when I asked him to describe his condition. Like carrying weapons that remain sheathed until needed. The knowledge of what I might become is present but not active, allowing me to remain myself while knowing that protection is available if required. The success of the modular approach offered hope for protecting our forces without forcing them to choose between physical corruption and spiritual isolation. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that each solution I developed simply raised new questions about the nature of humanity and the price of survival in a galaxy that seemed determined to destroy everything we held sacred. As I prepared for the next phase of our mission, I realized that the war we were fighting was about more than just military victory or territorial control. It was a struggle for the very definition of what it meant to be human, in an age when biological modification offered both salvation and damnation. The enemy had forced us to become something new in order to resist their influence, but whether that transformation represented evolution or corruption remained an open question. The Emperor protects, but his protection increasingly requires us to become something more and perhaps less than the humanity we seek to preserve. Chapter 7: Integration and Understanding. 6 months after implementing the modular genetic modification protocols, the Emperor's judgment had become something unprecedented in Imperial military history. A vessel crewed by warriors who existed at the boundary between human and post-human, their enhanced capabilities balanced by careful preservation of their spiritual and emotional cores. The transformation hadn't been without cost, but it had created a fighting force capable of engaging threats that would have corrupted or destroyed conventional Imperial forces. Brother Valerian had adapted to his modular enhancements with remarkable success, serving as both test subject and proof of concept for the new protection protocols. His experiences on missions where the genetic modifications activated provided crucial data for refining the process. During an engagement with contaminated forces on the mining world of Corvex VII, his enhanced immune responses had activated automatically when he encountered airborne spores designed to subvert human nervous systems. The activation is disorienting, he reported during his post-mission medical evaluation. For the duration of exposure, I became something else. Still myself, but with capabilities and perceptions that felt alien. I could sense the contamination's attempts to infiltrate my system and watch my own biology actively countering each attack. When the threat passed and the modifications returned to dormant state, it was like awakening from a vivid dream. His testimony revealed one of the unexpected benefits of the modular approach. Warriors who underwent temporary enhancement retained memories of their transformed state, allowing them to develop tactical expertise that combined baseline human intuition with post-human capabilities. They were becoming a new kind of hybrid force, equally at home in normal human society and in combat against exotic threats. Brother Marcus, who remained permanently transformed from his earlier treatment, had found his own form of adaptation. Unable to access the faith that had once defined his existence, he had developed a philosophical framework based on logical analysis and empirical observation. His approach to warfare had become coldly efficient, making tactical decisions based on probability calculations rather than emotional commitment. Yet his loyalty to his battle brothers remained absolute, grounded not in spiritual devotion but in logical recognition of their mutual dependence. I serve because service produces optimal outcomes. For human survival, he explained during one of our regular discussions about his psychological state. The Emperor's Imperium, whatever its flaws, represents the most successful organizational structure humanity has developed for resisting extinction. My personal feelings about its spiritual foundations are irrelevant to its practical utility. His perspective, while disturbing to many of his comrades, proved invaluable when facing enemies that relied on emotional manipulation or spiritual corruption. Where faith-based resistance might falter, his analytical detachment provided an unshakable foundation for continued resistance. He had become, in his own words, an immune system for the immune system, a warrior capable of fighting threats that targeted the very capacity for faith itself. The broader crew of the Emperor's judgment had adapted to their transformed comrades with the pragmatic acceptance that marked veteran imperial forces. While some unmodified warriors expressed discomfort with the changes they observed, most recognized the necessity of the enhancements and were grateful for the protection they provided. The ship had developed a culture that accommodated multiple forms of humanity without losing its essential identity as a bastion of imperial. Service Chaplain Ezekiel had perhaps made the most significant philosophical adaptation, developing new theological frameworks that could encompass the spiritual needs of both modified and unmodified warriors. His sermons had evolved to address questions of identity and purpose that transcended traditional distinctions between human and post-human, focusing on the common mission that united all servants of the Emperor regardless of their biological configuration. The Emperor's light shines through many vessels, he proclaimed during one memorable service attended by the entire ship's complement. Whether that vessel is born of flesh alone or enhanced through sacred technology, what matters is not the form, but the devotion that fills it. We are all instruments of his will, shaped by necessity and refined by service. My own transformation had been more subtle, but equally profound. Working so closely with the boundary between human and post-human had changed my understanding of both. The mechanical augmentations that had defined my identity as a tech priest no longer seemed like replacements for lost humanity. They had become extensions of human potential, tools that allowed consciousness to transcend the limitations of biological existence. I began to see the genetic modifications I performed not as corruption, but as evolution, guided by human intelligence toward purposes that served human survival. The tactical effectiveness of our modified forces became apparent during our next major engagement with the contamination threat. Intelligence reports had identified a coordination center on the industrial world of Tertius Majoris, where the alien intelligence appeared to be directing its campaign of biological warfare. The mission required infiltration of heavily contaminated territory where conventional forces would be compromised within hours of exposure. Our modified warriors penetrated the enemy's defenses with capabilities that combined the best of human tactical thinking with immunity to the biological weapons that protected the target. Brother Valerian's enhanced perception allowed him to navigate contaminated areas by detecting safe corridors that existed only at the microscopic level. Brother Marcus's analytical detachment enabled him to resist psychological warfare techniques that relied on emotional manipulation. The modular enhancement protocols activated automatically as warriors encountered different forms of contamination, providing specialized protection against each variant of biological attack. The enemy's coordination center proved to be, unlike anything in Imperial records, a vast biological complex that pulsed with its own internal life, its structures growing and adapting in real time as our forces approached. The facility wasn't built so much as cultivated, its architecture following organic principles that made conventional tactical analysis nearly impossible. Yet our modified warriors adapted to the challenge with a flexibility that surprised even me. "It's beautiful," Brother Arcturus whispered as we penetrated deeper into the facility, his modified metabolism allowing him to process the exotic atmosphere that would have been toxic to baseline humans. "I can feel its thoughts, its purpose. It's not malevolent. It simply sees humanity as raw material for a grander design." His words revealed another unexpected benefit of the modifications. Warriors who had been touched by alien influence retained a form of empathic connection that allowed them to understand enemy motivations without being corrupted by them. They could think like the enemy while remaining loyal to humanity, providing intelligence capabilities that conventional forces could never develop. The destruction of the coordination center required techniques that pushed our modified warriors to their absolute limits. The facility's defenses included biological entities that could adapt to threats in real time, forcing our forces to constantly evolve their own capabilities to maintain effectiveness. Yet they succeeded, dismantling the enemy's command structure and recovering intelligence that would prove crucial for future operations. As we departed Tertius Majoris with our mission accomplished, I reflected on how far we had all traveled from the conventional Imperial forces that had begun this campaign. We had become something new, not quite human in any traditional sense, but not alien either. We were evolution in action, guided by human intelligence and human values, toward forms that could survive in a galaxy determined to destroy everything recognizably human. The enemy had forced us to adapt or die, and we had chosen adaptation. Whether that choice represented victory or defeat remained to be seen, but it had certainly transformed our understanding of what it meant to serve the Emperor in an age when humanity itself was becoming something new. The Emperor protects, and perhaps his protection includes the wisdom to become whatever his servants need to be in order to survive and prevail. The months following our victory at Tertius Majoris brought unexpected challenges as we attempted to integrate the intelligence gathered from the Alien Coordination Center. The biological data we had recovered revealed the true scope of the threat facing humanity. Not just isolated contamination events, but a coordinated campaign spanning dozens of sectors, each phase designed to gather specific biological intelligence about Imperial defenses. Brother Valerian had become our primary interpreter of the alien data, his modified consciousness allowing him to process information that would have driven unenhanced minds to madness. The genetic alterations that had saved him from contamination also granted him insights into the enemy's biological architecture that proved invaluable for understanding their strategic objectives. "They're not trying to destroy us," he explained during one of our strategic briefings, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the ship's internal systems. "They're trying to understand us completely. Every contamination event is a biological probe designed to map human genetic diversity across different populations and environments. They're creating a comprehensive database of human physiology." The implications of his analysis transformed our understanding of the war we were fighting. The enemy wasn't engaging in random acts of biological terrorism. They were conducting the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history, using human populations as unwilling test subjects for weapons development programs that spanned multiple star systems. Captain Theron ordered immediate implementation of new security protocols designed to limit the enemy's access to biological intelligence. Every Imperial force under his command would undergo genetic screening to identify potential contamination, while modified warriors like our crew would serve as specialized response teams, capable of operating in environments where conventional forces would be compromised within minutes of exposure. The psychological impact of these revelations rippled through the ship's complement in ways that challenged our understanding of morale and unit cohesion. Warriors who had served the Emperor for centuries found themselves questioning fundamental assumptions about the nature of the threats they faced. The enemy wasn't simply another xeno species to be exterminated. It represented a form of intelligence that understood humanity, better than humans understood themselves. Brother Marcus proved instrumental in helping his battle brothers adapt to this new reality. His analytical detachment from emotional responses allowed him to process the strategic implications without the psychological trauma that affected warriors who retained conventional human consciousness. He began conducting informal briefings for unmodified personnel, helping them understand the threat in terms that didn't trigger the existential dread that paralyzed conventional tactical thinking. The enemy's capabilities are extensive but not unlimited, he explained to a group of Space Marines who had requested guidance on maintaining combat effectiveness against biologically superior opponents. Their understanding of human physiology provides tactical advantages, but it also creates dependencies that can be exploited. By becoming unpredictable through controlled modification, we deny them the stable target parameters their weapons require. His words carried weight because they came from someone who had undergone the most extreme transformation while retaining absolute loyalty to the Imperial cause. Warriors who might have rejected similar advice from unmodified sources found his perspective compelling precisely because he had sacrificed his capacity for conventional faith while maintaining perfect dedication to the mission. The integration of our modified forces with conventional Imperial units presented ongoing challenges that required constant attention from both medical and command personnel. Modified warriors operated according to different biological and psychological parameters than their unmodified comrades, creating coordination difficulties that could prove fatal during combat. Operations Brother Arcturus had developed specialized communication protocols that allowed him to interface directly with ship systems during combat, providing real-time tactical data that enhanced unit effectiveness, but required other warriors to adapt to decision-making processes that operated at superhuman speeds. His modified metabolism allowed him to function without rest for periods that exceeded normal human endurance, but his different dietary requirements meant he couldn't participate in the communal meals that traditionally bonded Imperial forces together. "I dream of the collective now," he confided during one of our regular medical evaluations. "Not the nightmare communion that the enemy tried to force on me, but something better. A voluntary integration of consciousness that preserves individual identity while enabling unprecedented coordination. I think that's what we're becoming, whether we planned it or not." His visions had begun influencing the development of our tactical doctrine in ways that proved remarkably effective. The modified warriors under my care were developing spontaneous coordination abilities that allowed them to function as a unified organism during combat while maintaining their individual personalities and decision-making capabilities during normal operations. Chaplain Ezekiel had established regular counseling sessions for warriors experiencing difficulty adapting to their enhanced capabilities. His theological framework had evolved to address questions of identity and purpose that had no precedent in Imperial doctrine, helping modified personnel understand their transformations. As part of the Emperor's larger plan for human evolution, "You have not lost your humanity," he proclaimed during one of his sermons to the modified warriors. "You have discovered what humanity was always meant to become." The Emperor's vision for our species was never limited to our current biological configuration. He showed us that consciousness could transcend flesh, that purpose could overcome limitation, that service could transform weakness into strength. His words resonated with warriors who struggled to reconcile their enhanced capabilities with their traditional understanding of human nature. The modifications I had performed weren't simply medical procedures, they were theological statements about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical form. The tactical effectiveness of our integrated forces became apparent during subsequent missions against contamination sites throughout the sector. Modified warriors could operate in environments that would incapacitate conventional forces, while their enhanced capabilities allowed them to gather intelligence that provided crucial advantages for follow-up operations by unmodified units. During our assault on the manufacturing complex at Xerion Beta, Brother Valerian's enhanced perception allowed him to navigate biological hazards that would have been invisible to normal sensors. His ability to detect contamination at the molecular level enabled our forces to avoid ambush points where the enemy had prepared biological traps specifically designed to capture and study Imperial forces. "The entire facility is a laboratory," he reported as we penetrated deeper into the complex. "Every corridor is designed to channel intruders into collection points where different forms of contamination can be tested against various types of imperial military equipment. They're using our own tactical doctrine against us. His insights allowed us to avoid the enemy's traps while gathering intelligence about their research methodologies. The facility contained biological samples from hundreds of different human populations, each one tagged with detailed genetic analysis that revealed the scope of the enemy's intelligence-gathering operations. They had been studying humanity for far longer than anyone had suspected. The discovery of human genetic samples from worlds that had been reported as uncontaminated forced us to reconsider the entire scope of the enemy's penetration into Imperial space. The biological intelligence gathering operation wasn't limited to avert contamination events. It included covert sampling programs that had been operating for decades without detection. Brother, Marcus's analytical capabilities proved crucial for processing the intelligence we recovered from Zerion Beta. His consciousness could parse data at speeds that exceeded conventional analysis methods, identifying patterns and connections that revealed the enemy's long-term strategic objectives. They're preparing for biological warfare on a galactic scale, he reported after spending 18 hours in continuous data analysis. The genetic samples and tactical intelligence they've gathered will allow them to create contamination variants specifically tailored to the populations and military forces of individual star systems. They're planning simultaneous attacks designed to overwhelm Imperial response capabilities. His analysis revealed timelines that suggested the enemy's main offensive would begin within standard months, giving us a limited window to develop and implement countermeasures on a scale that matched the threat we faced. The genetic modification protocols I had developed would need to be distributed throughout Imperial space before the enemy could complete their preparations. The challenge of scaling up the modification process to protect entire populations required resources and coordination that exceeded anything the Adeptus Mechanicus had attempted before. Each genetic enhancement package needed to be customized for specific population groups, taking into account local genetic variations and environmental factors that could affect the success of the modifications. I began training teams of specialists who could implement the enhancement protocols under field conditions, teaching them to perform genetic modifications using portable equipment that could function in combat zones or civilian settlements under siege. The procedures they learned represented a simplified version of the techniques I had developed aboard the Emperor's Judgment, but they retained sufficient sophistication to provide meaningful protection against the biological weapons we expected to encounter. The first large-scale implementation of the modification program took place on the industrial world of 41st Prime, where contamination events had already compromised significant portions of the population. The survivors provided an ideal test group for evaluating the effectiveness of genetic enhancements under real-world conditions. Working with a team of 12 specialists, I established field hospitals in 3 different population centers, each one equipped with the portable genetic modification equipment that would become standard throughout the Imperial military. The procedures we performed were necessarily simplified compared to the complex enhancements I had developed for Space Marines, but they provided basic protection against the most common forms of biological contamination. The modifications feel natural, reported Governor Matthias, after undergoing the basic enhancement package. I can sense biological threats that would have been invisible before, and my immune system responds to contamination attempts automatically, but I still feel human in every way that matters to me. His positive response encouraged other civilian leaders to undergo the modifications, creating a cascading effect that led to widespread acceptance of the enhancement program throughout the planetary population. Within 6 weeks, nearly 80% of the surviving population had received at least basic genetic modifications, creating the first human settlement, specifically designed to resist biological warfare. The success of the 41st Prime program provided the template for planetary-scale implementation throughout Imperial space. Teams of genetic specialists were dispatched to hundreds of worlds, carrying with them the equipment and expertise necessary to modify entire populations before the enemy's offensive could begin. The cultural implications of widespread genetic modification became apparent as the program expanded beyond military personnel to include civilian populations. Traditional concepts of human purity came into conflict with practical necessities of survival, creating theological and philosophical debates that would reshape Imperial society for generations to come. Chaplain Ezekiel worked tirelessly to develop doctrinal frameworks that could accommodate genetic modification within existing Imperial theology. His interpretations of the Emperor's teachings emphasized adaptation and evolution as divine mandates, arguing that controlled modification represented fulfillment of humanity's destiny rather than deviation from sacred human form. The Emperor's sacrifice was not made to preserve humanity in static perfection, he proclaimed during planetary broadcasts that reached billions of citizens. It was made to ensure that human consciousness could survive and flourish regardless of the challenges that threatened our existence. Genetic modification is not corruption, it is evolution, guided by divine wisdom toward purposes that serve the greater glory of mankind. His theological arguments proved persuasive to populations that had witnessed the devastating effects of biological contamination firsthand. Communities that had lost significant numbers to alien biological weapons embraced genetic modification as both practical necessity and spiritual imperative. The enemy's response to our defensive preparations became apparent through intelligence reports from deep space monitoring stations. Their biological research facilities had begun producing new contamination variants specifically designed to penetrate the genetic modifications we were implementing, confirming our analysis of their capabilities while demonstrating the sophistication of their adaptive strategies. They're learning from every modification we perform, I reported during a strategic briefing with Sector Command. Each genetic enhancement we implement provides them with data they can use to develop more effective weapons. We're engaged in an evolutionary arms race that operates at the cellular level. This realization led to the development of adaptive modification protocols that could evolve autonomously in response to new threats. Instead of static genetic enhancements, I began creating modification packages that incorporated artificial intelligence algorithms capable of analyzing incoming biological threats and developing countermeasures automatically. The first implementation of adaptive genetic modification was performed on volunteers from the Deathwatch, warriors whose existing enhancements provided a stable foundation for the more sophisticated modifications required. The procedure took weeks to complete, during which I essentially installed biological computers within their genetic structure that could process contamination data and implement defensive responses without conscious intervention. Brother Valerian was among the first to undergo adaptive modification, his previous enhancements making him an ideal candidate for the experimental procedure. The transformation required careful integration of artificial intelligence systems with his existing genetic modifications, creating a hybrid consciousness that combined human intuition with computational analysis capabilities. "I can feel the program's working," he reported after the modification sequence was complete. "My immune system has become a research and development facility that operates automatically to counter new threats. It's like carrying a piece of the Omnissiah's knowledge within my own biology." His success encouraged other volunteers, and soon I was performing adaptive modifications on warriors throughout the sector. Each successful procedure created a defender capable of evolving their own biological defenses in real time, providing protection against contamination variants that hadn't been encountered before. The implications of adaptive genetic modification extended far beyond immediate tactical applications. Warriors who underwent the procedure became living laboratories capable of developing new enhancement protocols through their own biological processes, essentially turning every modified soldier into a research station that could contribute to humanity's ongoing evolution. As our forces prepared for the enemy's anticipated offensive, I reflected on how far we had traveled from conventional concepts of human biology and military organization. We were becoming something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that could direct its own evolution in response to immediate threats while maintaining the consciousness and values that defined our essential humanity. The war we faced would be fought not just with weapons and tactics, but with the fundamental building blocks of life itself. Victory would belong to whichever side could adapt fastest, while preserving the essential qualities that made survival worthwhile. In that contest, humanity's greatest advantage might be our capacity for conscious choice about the direction of our own evolution. Chapter 8: Resolution and Warning. 2 years after my first assignment to the Deathwatch, I found myself standing once again in a surgical theatre, but everything had changed. The patient on my table was a newly arrived apothecary from the Iron Hands, his augmetic enhancements extensive enough that the boundary between flesh and machine had become nearly meaningless. He had volunteered for the modular genetic modification protocol after witnessing the devastation wrought by the latest variant of the contamination threat on the fortress world of Thessia Prime. Magos, he said as I prepared the injection sequences that would grant him protection against biological corruption. I need to understand what I'm becoming. My chapter believes that the flesh is weak, but what you offer seems to suggest that even enhanced flesh requires constant modification to remain viable. I paused in my preparations, considering how to answer a question that had consumed my thoughts for months. The genetic modifications I now performed routinely were far more sophisticated than anything I had attempted during those first desperate surgeries after Thessia Prime. Each new variant offered better protection, fewer side effects, and greater reversibility. Yet each advancement also moved us further from any recognizable definition of baseline humanity. You are becoming what humanity needs to survive in a galaxy that considers our existence an aberration, I replied, activating the injection system with a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. The flesh is indeed weak, brother, but consciousness is strong. What we preserve through these modifications is not your biological form, but your capacity to choose, to serve, to maintain loyalty to values that transcend physical existence. The injection sequence took 3 hours to complete, during which we discussed the philosophical implications of voluntary evolution. The Iron Hands had always embraced technological enhancement as a means of transcending human limitations. But my modifications offered something different: the ability to adapt to threats that hadn't existed when the Primarchs walked among mortals. We were entering an age where genetic flexibility might be as important as technological advancement for ensuring human survival. When the procedure was complete, the apothecary remained conscious and alert, his enhanced nervous system having adapted to the genetic modifications with remarkable efficiency. Internal scans showed the dormant enhancement sequences integrating smoothly with his existing augmentics, creating a hybrid system that combined mechanical precision with biological adaptability. I feel potential, he said, echoing the words Brother Valerian had used months earlier. As if I carry within myself the capacity to become whatever the mission requires, while remaining essentially myself. It is an acceptable form of strength. His acceptance represented something I had seen repeatedly among the warriors who underwent the modular enhancement protocols. Rather than viewing the modifications as corruption or deviation from human purity, they had begun to understand them as tools, sophisticated instruments that could be employed when necessary, while remaining dormant when not needed. The genetic programs I installed didn't change who they were, they simply expanded what they could become when circumstances demanded it. The broader strategic situation had evolved dramatically since our first encounters with the contamination threat. Intelligence reports indicated that 17 different alien factions had adopted similar biological warfare techniques, suggesting either widespread technology transfer or convergent evolution toward the same tactical approach. The enemy had learned that humanity's greatest weakness wasn't our limited technology or our fragmented political structure. It was our fixed, biological configuration that made us vulnerable to precisely targeted corruption, Captain. Theron summoned me to his strategic planning chamber for a final briefing before my reassignment to a newly constructed research facility beneath the surface of Mars. The scope of the project I would be leading represented the logical culmination of everything I had learned during my service with the Deathwatch, the development of genetic modification protocols that could be implemented across the entire Imperial military structure. Magos Vex, he began, his scarred features bearing the weight of decisions that would affect the future of human civilization. Your work aboard the Emperor's Judgment has proven that biological adaptation can provide protection against contamination threats while preserving the essential humanity of our forces. The Fabricator General has authorized the establishment of a new research division under your direction, tasked with developing enhancement protocols that can be deployed throughout the Imperium. The magnitude of the responsibility he was describing staggered even my augmented consciousness. I would be creating the genetic foundation for a new form of humanity, one capable of surviving in a galaxy where biological warfare had become the primary threat to human existence. The decisions I made in my laboratory would determine whether future generations remained recognizably human or became something else entirely. Sir, I replied, choosing my words carefully, the protocols we have developed work effectively on space marines whose enhanced physiology provides a stable foundation for genetic modification. Implementing similar enhancements across civilian populations would require extensive testing and gradual introduction to prevent widespread biological collapse. You will have whatever resources you require, Captain Theron assured me. The Emperor's Imperium faces an existential threat that cannot be countered through conventional military responses. If humanity must evolve to survive, then evolution will proceed under Imperial guidance rather than alien influence. As I prepared for departure from the Emperor's judgment, I conducted final examinations of the warriors who had served as test subjects for my various modification protocols. Brother Marcus remained the most dramatically altered, his complete transformation having left him permanently changed, but remarkably effective in his new configuration. His analytical approach to warfare had proven invaluable against enemies that relied on emotional manipulation, and his tactical assessments had become required reading throughout the Deathwatch. "Do you regret what you have become?" I asked him during our final consultation. His response carried the precise articulation that had replaced his former emotional expressiveness. "Regret implies an emotional attachment to alternative outcomes that serves no useful purpose in current circumstances. I am optimally configured for my assigned mission parameters. Whether I experience satisfaction or dissatisfaction with this configuration is irrelevant to its effectiveness." Yet despite his clinical language, I detected subtle indicators that suggested greater complexity in his psychological state than he typically displayed. The transformation that had cost him his capacity for faith had also freed him from the emotional burdens that might have compromised his effectiveness. In some ways, he had become the perfect warrior for an age when warfare itself had been redefined by biological threats. Brother Valerian's adaptation to the modular enhancement protocols represented the future I hoped to create for Imperial forces. His ability to activate protective modifications when needed, while maintaining normal human consciousness during inactive periods, offered the best compromise between necessary capability and essential humanity. His experiences during combat activations had contributed crucial data to refining the process for wider implementation. "The transformations feel natural now," he reported during his final evaluation. "I understand that I carry within myself the capacity to become temporarily post-human when circumstances require it, but I remain fundamentally human in my thoughts and loyalties. It is a form of strength that feels like a gift rather than a burden." As I departed the Emperor's judgment for the last time, I carried with me genetic samples and research data that would form the foundation for humanity's next evolutionary step. The work ahead would determine whether our species survived the biological warfare campaigns being waged against us, or whether we would be transformed into something that no longer deserved the name human. Yet I had learned during my service, with the Deathwatch, that survival sometimes requires accepting changes that challenge our fundamental assumptions about identity and purpose. The warriors I had treated and modified remained loyal to the Emperor and committed to protecting humanity, even as they became something more and perhaps different from what they had been. Their transformation offered hope that evolution could proceed under human guidance toward purposes that served human values. The galaxy may force us to adapt or die, but as long as we retain the capacity to choose the direction of our adaptation, we remain essentially human regardless of the forms that choice might require us to inhabit. The Emperor protects, and perhaps his greatest protection is the gift of consciousness capable of transcending any physical configuration while preserving the values that define us as his servants. In the end, the most important question isn't what we become, but why we choose to become it. The Emperor protects, and we protect what it means to be worthy of his protection. The research facility beneath Mars that would become my new domain represented the culmination of 30 millennia of human scientific achievement. Carved from the living rock of the red planet's crust, its laboratories extended through 17 levels of increasing security and sophistication. The deepest chambers housed genetic manipulation equipment that pushed the boundaries of what the Omnissiah's sacred knowledge permitted, while the upper levels contained testing facilities where volunteer subjects could undergo controlled transformation under optimal conditions. My first tour of the facility was conducted by Dominus Castrix, a senior tech priest whose own modifications had progressed so far beyond baseline humanity that communication required direct neural interface rather than conventional speech. His consciousness touched mine through encrypted data streams that carried information at speeds no organic brain could process, downloading centuries of accumulated research into my enhanced memory banks. the Fabricator General, has designated this project as Priority Omega. His thoughts informed me as we descended through security, checkpoints that scanned for genetic contamination at the molecular level. Every resource of the Mechanicus is at your disposal for developing enhancement protocols that can protect humanity from biological warfare. The future of our species may depend on the work conducted within these chambers. The scope of the research program was staggering. Teams of geneticists, biologists, and tech adepts worked around the clock to analyze samples collected from dozens of contamination sites across the galaxy. Each alien organism represented a different approach to subverting human biology, requiring specialized countermeasures that could be integrated into a comprehensive protection system. The challenge wasn't simply creating genetic modifications that worked. It was developing enhancements that could adapt to threats that hadn't been encountered yet. My personal laboratory occupied an entire level of the facility, equipped with genetic sequencing equipment capable of analyzing DNA at the quantum level and fabrication systems that could synthesize custom organisms designed to specific parameters. The walls were lined with stasis pods containing genetic samples from every known variant of contamination, a biological library that represented both the greatest threats to humanity and the raw material for our salvation. The first major breakthrough came when I discovered that the alien organisms weren't simply random biological weapons. They were components of a larger system, each variant designed to gather specific types of biological data about human physiology. The contamination events we had encountered weren't isolated attacks, but reconnaissance missions, probing humanity's defenses and cataloging our capabilities for some larger offensive that had yet to be revealed. The enemy is mapping our genome. I reported to the Fabricator General during our weekly strategic briefing. Every contamination event provides them with detailed information about human biology, allowing them to refine their weapons for maximum effectiveness. We are facing a coordinating intelligence that understands biological warfare better than anything in Imperial records. The implications of this discovery transformed our entire approach to defense. Instead of simply creating reactive countermeasures, we needed to develop proactive enhancements that could anticipate threats before they manifested. The genetic modifications I began designing incorporated predictive algorithms that could analyze incoming biological threats and adapt automatically to counter them, creating a form of evolutionary arms race that operated at the cellular level. The testing phase required volunteers from across the Imperial military structure, warriors who understood that they were participating in experiments that could fundamentally alter the future of human evolution. The first test group consisted of Space Marines from various chapters, their enhanced physiology providing a stable foundation for the more exotic modifications I was developing. Each subject underwent extensive psychological evaluation to ensure they understood the implications of voluntary evolution. Brother Captain Thaelon of the Blood Angels proved to be an ideal test subject, his chapter's genetic instability making him particularly suitable for modifications that required biological flexibility. The enhancements I performed on him incorporated adaptive algorithms that could respond to contamination threats by activating specialized immune responses tailored to specific alien organisms. The process took 72 hours of continuous surgery, during which I essentially rewrote his genetic code to include dormant programs that could be activated as needed. I feel like I'm carrying an armory of biological weapons, he reported after the initial recovery period. Each modification responds to different threats, activating automatically when danger is detected. It's like having a personal immune system designed by the Emperor himself. His success encouraged other volunteers, and soon I was performing enhancement procedures on subjects from across the Imperial military hierarchy. Imperial Guard veterans whose exposure to contamination had left them partially resistant volunteered for modifications that would complete their protection. Naval officers who commanded ships in contaminated space requested enhancements that would allow them to function in hostile environments. Even civilian populations in border regions began requesting access to protective modifications. The cultural implications of widespread genetic modification became apparent as the program expanded. Traditional distinctions between enhanced and unenhanced humans began to blur as more of the population underwent voluntary evolution. Religious authorities debated whether genetically modified humans could still be considered to possess souls in the traditional sense, while military commanders struggled to integrate post-human capabilities into conventional tactical doctrine. chaplain. Ezekiel visited my facility regularly to provide spiritual guidance for subjects undergoing transformation. His theological frameworks had continued to evolve, incorporating concepts of guided evolution that reconciled genetic modification with imperial doctrine. His sermons to the test subjects explored themes of transcendence and adaptation that helped them maintain their spiritual connections despite fundamental changes to their biology. The Emperor's plan for humanity has always included evolution, he proclaimed, during one memorable service attended by dozens of modified subjects. From the moment he walked among us, he demonstrated that humanity's destiny lay not in static perfection, but in constant growth toward greater service to his will. What we do here continues that sacred journey, guided by wisdom and directed toward purposes that serve all mankind. The most challenging aspect of the research involved creating modifications that could be safely implemented in civilian populations. Space Marines and other military personnel possessed enhanced physiology that could tolerate extreme genetic manipulation, but ordinary humans required gentler approaches that achieved similar protective effects without overwhelming their biological systems. The solution came through developing modular enhancement packages that could be installed gradually over time, allowing subjects to adapt to each modification before introducing the next level of protection. The first civilian test group consisted of agricultural workers from worlds that had experienced contamination events. Their exposure to alien organisms had left them with partial immunity that provided a foundation for more comprehensive modifications. The enhancements I developed for them were designed to be subtle, providing protection without obvious external changes that might trigger social rejection or psychological trauma. "We barely noticed the differences," reported cultivator Petrana from the agri-world of Demeter's garden after completing her modification sequence. "I can work in areas that used to require full environmental suits, and my resistance to disease has improved dramatically. But I still feel human in every way that matters." Her testimony became the template for community acceptance of genetic modification programs. By emphasizing continuity of identity and gradual implementation, we were able to overcome much of the resistance that had initially greeted the enhancement protocols. Communities that had experienced contamination events became enthusiastic supporters of the program, while populations that remained unaffected showed increasing interest in voluntary participation. The strategic implications of widespread genetic modification became apparent as intelligence reports revealed the enemy's response to our enhanced defenses. The biological weapons being deployed against human settlements had begun showing adaptations that suggested the alien intelligence was learning from encounters with modified subjects. Each new variant of contamination represented an evolutionary response to our countermeasures, creating an arms race that operated at the genetic level. "They're adapting faster than we anticipated," reported Watch Captain Stern during one of our tactical briefings. "The contamination variants we're encountering now are specifically designed to penetrate the genetic modifications you've developed. We need enhancement protocols that can evolve as quickly as the enemy's weapons." This challenge led to my greatest breakthrough, the development of self-modifying genetic programs that could adapt autonomously to new threats without requiring surgical intervention. The enhancement sequences I created incorporated artificial intelligence algorithms that could analyze incoming contamination and develop countermeasures in real time, essentially giving modified subjects their own internal research and development systems. The first implementation of adaptive genetic modification was performed on myself, a decision that reflected both my confidence in the technology and my recognition that I needed to understand the full implications of what I was creating. The procedure required 6 months of gradual enhancement, during which I essentially transformed myself into a living laboratory, capable of developing new genetic modifications. Through conscious effort, the transformation was unlike anything I had experienced during my previous augmentations. Where mechanical enhancements had replaced biological systems, the genetic modifications enhanced and expanded my existing capabilities without eliminating their organic foundation. I retained my human consciousness while gaining access to biological processes that operated below the level of conscious awareness. "You've become something unprecedented," observed Dominus Castrix during my post-modification evaluation. "Your consciousness now extends into genetic processes that typically operate autonomously. You can literally think new capabilities into existence and implement them at the cellular level. My enhanced condition allowed me to accelerate the research program dramatically. Instead of relying on external equipment to analyze genetic sequences, I could process biological data directly through modified neural pathways that operated at quantum processing speeds. The enhancements I developed for other subjects could be tested and refined within my own biology before implementation, reducing the risks associated with experimental procedures. The success of the adaptive modification program attracted attention from the highest levels of imperial authority. Inquisitor Valerius of the Ordo Xenos arrived at the facility unannounced. His retinue, including specialists in genetic purity, who conducted exhaustive tests to ensure that the modifications hadn't introduced any form of corruption. His investigation took 3 weeks, during which every aspect of the research program was subjected to intense scrutiny. Your work represents either humanity's greatest hope or its most dangerous heresy, he informed me after completing his evaluation. The modifications you've developed provide genuine protection against Xenos contamination, but they also fundamentally alter what it means to be human. I cannot determine whether you are saving our species or destroying it. His concerns reflected broader debates within imperial society about the implications of voluntary evolution. Traditional factions argued that genetic modification violated the sacred human form that the Emperor had died to protect, while progressive voices claimed that adaptation was necessary for survival in a galaxy determined to destroy baseline humanity. The resolution of this debate would determine whether the enhancement programs could be implemented on the scale necessary to protect human civilization. The crisis point came when intelligence reports revealed that the enemy was preparing for a coordinated offensive that would deploy biological weapons against every major human settlement simultaneously. The contamination variants being developed were specifically designed to overcome existing imperial defenses, suggesting that the alien intelligence had completed its reconnaissance phase and was ready to begin systematic extermination of human populations. We have perhaps 6 months before the offensive begins, reported High Admiral Korath during an emergency strategic conference. If the enhancement programs are going to provide meaningful protection, they must be implemented immediately on a galactic scale. The choice is no longer between enhanced and unenhanced humanity, it's between evolution and extinction. The decision to implement emergency genetic modification protocols was made by the High Lords of Terra after extensive consultation with the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Imperial Guard, and various Space Marine chapters. The program I had developed would be distributed to every human settlement in Imperial space, with implementation prioritized based on strategic importance and vulnerability to attack. My final months on Mars were spent training teams of genetic specialists who would oversee the implementation process across hundreds of worlds. Each team carried with them the accumulated knowledge of my research program, along with the technological infrastructure necessary to perform genetic modifications under field conditions. The future of human evolution would no longer be determined in sterile laboratories, but in the desperate circumstances of a galaxy at war. As I prepared for my next assignment, leading the genetic modification program for the Ultima Segmentum, I reflected on how far humanity had traveled from the baseline species that had first ventured into the stars. We were becoming something new, something adapted to survive in a hostile universe through conscious evolution rather than random mutation. Whether this transformation represented progress or devolution remained to be seen, but it offered the only hope for preserving human consciousness in a galaxy that seemed determined to extinguish it. The Emperor protects, and perhaps his greatest protection is the gift of adaptability that allows his servants to become whatever they need to be in order to continue serving his will. The war for humanity's survival would be fought not just with weapons and tactics, but with the very genetic code that defined our species. In that war, victory would belong to those who could evolve fastest while retaining the essential qualities that made them worth preserving.